Certainly. Part 1 of In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is titled The Last to See Them Alive and sets the stage for the brutal murders that will be the focus of the rest of the book. In this part, Capote introduces the Clutter family, who live on a farm in the small town of Hickock, Kansas. Capote provides detailed descriptions of each family member, including Father Herbert, Mother Bonnie, and children Kenyon and Nancy. The Clutters are depicted as a well-respected and well-liked family in the community, and Capote takes care to provide context about their daily routines and interactions with others. On the morning of November 15, 1959, the town is rocked by news of the brutal murder of the Clutter family. Capote's writing is vivid and detailed as he describes the crime scene, including the bodies of each family member and the state of the house. It's immediately clear to investigators that the crime was not a robbery gone wrong, as there are no signs of forced entry and nothing appears to be missing from the house. Capote also explores the reactions of the townspeople to the murders, describing the shock and horror that permeates the community. As investigators arrive on the scene and begin their work, Capote paints a picture of a community in crisis, with people afraid for their own safety and the safety of their loved ones. Through his detailed descriptions and attention to character, Capote sets up a sense of impending doom in this first part of the book. The reader is left with a deep sense of foreboding, wondering who could have committed such a heinous crime and what could have motivated them. Certainly. Part 2 of In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is titled Persons Unknown and focuses on the investigation into the murders of the Clutter family in the small town of Hickock, Kansas. In this section, Capote provides a detailed account of the search for clues and potential suspects in the case. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation and local law enforcement officers conduct interviews with townspeople and gather evidence at the crime scene, but they find no clear leads. The lack of motive for the crime and the fact that there are no witnesses or fingerprints makes it difficult for investigators to make progress. Capote also introduces a number of potential suspects in the case, including a pair of hitchhikers who were seen in the area at the time of the murders, and an ex-convict who was rumored to have a grudge against the Clutter family. However, none of these leads prove fruitful, and the investigation reaches a dead end. Throughout this section, Capote paints a vivid picture of the investigation, from the painstaking collection of evidence to the frustration of law enforcement officials who can't seem to crack the case. He also explores the impact of the murders on the community, with people becoming increasingly fearful and anxious in the absence of any resolution. By the end of Part 2, it's clear that the investigation into the Clutter murders is at a standstill. The lack of suspects and evidence leaves law enforcement officials and the community at a loss, wondering if the killer or killers will ever be brought to justice. Part 3 of In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is titled Dancer and delves into the backgrounds and motivations of the two men who eventually confess to the murders of the Clutter family, Richard Hickock and Perry Smith. In this section, Capote provides detailed biographies of both men, exploring their troubled pasts and criminal histories. Dick Hickock is depicted as a smooth-talking con man with a history of fraud and theft, while Perry Smith is described as a tortured soul with a difficult childhood and a tendency towards violence. Capote also explores the relationship between the two men, detailing how they met in prison and hatched the plan to rob the Clutter family. As the investigation into the Clutter murders stalls, Hickock and Smith make their way to Mexico, where they spend some time living it up with stolen money. However, they soon run out of funds and decide to head back to the United States. They are eventually caught by authorities in Las Vegas and brought back to Kansas to stand trial for their crimes. Capote provides a detailed account of the interrogation and eventual confessions of Hickock and Smith. He explores their motivations for the crime, including their belief that the Clutters were wealthy and their desire for easy money. He also examines the psychological toll that the crime takes on both men, particularly Smith, who becomes increasingly unstable and prone to outbursts. Throughout this section, Capote draws on his talents as a storyteller and journalist, weaving together a complex narrative that explores the motivations and psychology of the killers. He also provides insight into the criminal justice system, detailing the legal strategies of the defense and prosecution and exploring the impact of the trial on the families of the victims and the community at large. By the end of Part 3, the reader is left with a sense of the tragic inevitability of the crime, as Hickock and Smith's backgrounds and personalities converge in a deadly and destructive way. Part 4 of In Cold Blood by Truman Capote is titled The Corner and explores the aftermath of the trial and execution of Richard Dick Hickock and Perry Smith. In this section, Capote focuses on the impact of the murders and the subsequent trial and execution on the families of the victims and the community of Holcomb, Kansas. He examines the psychological toll of the crime, detailing how it continues to haunt those affected by it long after the killers are put to death. He also explores the concept of justice, asking whether the execution of Hickock and Smith truly brings closure to those affected by the crime. Capote also provides insight into the lives of the killers in their final months, including their time on death row and their eventual execution by hanging. He examines the psychological state of both men, particularly Smith, who becomes increasingly philosophical and introspective in the weeks leading up to his death. Throughout this section, Capote's writing style becomes increasingly poetic and introspective, as he grapples with the complex emotions and themes at the heart of the book. He explores the nature of evil, the meaning of justice, and the fragility of human life, all through the lens of the Clutter murders and their aftermath. By the end of Part 4, Capote leaves the reader with a sense of the lasting impact of the crime, both on those directly affected by it and on the larger society. He raises important questions about the nature of justice and the limits of punishment, leaving readers to grapple with these issues long after the book is finished.